In this video, we're going to look at how to work with a sort of vintage channel strip. We're going to be using the UAD SSL E series channel strip, which is going to allow us to work with EQ and compression and begin to see how vintage channel strips are configured. So at the moment, whilst I've set up the channel strip ready for work on this vocal part, nothing is actually switched on yet. None of the modules are working here yet. So we're just going to hear a completely dry vocal sitting on top of a very sparse backing track. This is how it sounds right now.
Love ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, love ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
So whilst you can hear some reverb just on that pad part at the moment, the vocal is completely dry. You can see in the channel strip, we've got no auxiliary effects set up, and as I say, just the E series sitting here ready for work. So first of all, let's have a look at seeing actually how this plugin is configured. What we've got are separate modules really. This one here is for the EQ section, the whole of this sort of right-hand side. Then we've got dynamics compression area as well. And we've got filters down here as well, which we'll talk about shortly. And then we've got sort of output levels and faders over here on the right-hand side. So to work on this sound, the first thing I want to do is to affect its tone, which means that I need to switch on the EQ module, at which point all of these dials become available. So I've got high frequencies up here. I've got a high mid channel with the green dials here, low mid range with the blue, and low frequency or bass with the brown dials here. And if I just solo this part, then we'll be able to hear this EQ working. So what I'm interested to do is to dial in a little bit more air in the sound. I'm going to be working with high frequency content and just getting some of the shine that's kind of familiar to anyone who's worked with SSL channel strips before. We can get this really nice sort of airy, warm sound. And we'll just dial in an EQ solution which will allow this vocal to sit a little bit more within the track and feel a bit more part of it. It sounds quite flat right now.
Love ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, love ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn. Love ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, love ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn. Love ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, love ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
So I've made some basic EQ changes there. You can see that first of all, I've selected a frequency around sort of 10 kilohertz, and we've turned this up a little bit as well, about 3 dB, just to give some extra air. I've done something similar around sort of 5 kilohertz, and you can see that with the high mid-range control, I've obviously got a bandwidth control as well. So whereas this is a shelf filter here, I've got a sort of bell curve, and I can make that quite broad, which means that I'm going to be affecting a larger group of frequencies around that central one, or a narrow group. I've got the same controls here with low mid-range, and you heard as we were sort of playing that through that I isolated a frequency around 800 hertz. So this is 1 kilohertz here, it's around 800 hertz, made that quite broad, and I turned it up just to hear what that sounded like, quite telephony. And I've backed that frequency down, and then I've also used the low shelf around sort of 400 hertz just to get rid of any low frequency content, of which there isn't very much in this vocal. Now, obviously, we've soloed this, and we can hear now the difference between the original, which I'll play in a second, and then the EQ'd version. But to really know whether or not these EQ's choices are working, we obviously need to put the vocal back in the track. So first of all, let's just hear the original, and then I'll punch the EQ in, and we'll hear the difference. But then we need to check it with the backing track and see if these tone changes work.
Love ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, love ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn. Loving ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, loving ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
So that's working well. Having auditioned the EQ kind of on and off, one phrase after another, we've got sort of much nicer tone quality now. The vocal sort of poking out of the mix a little bit more, and the vocal sounds like it has a bit more character and belongs with the track. However, it would be really nice to also work with dynamics just so we can kind of get some compression into this vocal. And to do that, what we need to do is to turn the compressor on. Now, the moment we do that, we've got an option to decide whether or not we want the EQ section to work before the compressor or after it. So if I want EQ followed by compression, I need to press the pre-dynamics button. So in other words, EQ happens before the dynamics. And if I'd rather the compressor worked first and then EQ came afterwards, I can switch that off. I tend to work with EQ before compression, so I'm going to leave this switched on for now. So what I've got a chance to do now is to work with the main compression sort of section here, and in particular, what I'm going to do is to set a threshold level so that we've got a chance to monitor how much volume is being compressed. The threshold level is obviously going to determine the point at which compression sort of kicks in or arrives. And so I can either compress a lot of the signal or just a little bit to pick out peaks. So we're going to start there with the threshold dial and just see how much gain reduction we're applying when we change this dial here.
Loving ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, loving ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
So you can see that obviously the lower the threshold, so the more round to the right this dial is, effectively the more gain reduction is applied, and therefore more of the signal is being compressed. Now, you can see even from the waveform here, actually levels are pretty consistent through this vocal performance. So we don't need to go crazy if we don't want to, but at the same time, it's quite nice to really get control of this from a dynamics point of view. So I'm going to leave this around where we were. Then what I've got is my ratio control. How hard do I want the compressor to work above that point? At the moment, we're at a ratio of around sort of 5:1, which is, you know, fairly serious compression without going too crazy. But again, that's a control that I can adjust if I want more or less compression.
Loving ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, loving ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
Okay, so that's working fairly nicely around this area. We've got complete control over the vocal volume here. So just fire these two separate modules, EQ, which has allowed us to affect tone, and with the dynamic section here, the compression section here, we've got control over threshold and ratio, and I've got a release control here if I want it as well. This expansion module I'm not using at the moment, these green dials, so I'm not using the expander, I'm just using the compressor. And if I had low frequency content that I wanted to get rid of, in other words, to apply a high pass filter, I could turn on the filters here as well. And equally, the same thing is true at the other end of the frequency spectrum with a low pass filter. So these can be switched in if I need them, but I don't think I do for this particular part. And again, we could look at working before the compression stage if we wanted to punch the filters in before compression took place. So you can see that even with just basic tone and compression controls, we've now got a vocal that sits much more comfortably within the track. And obviously what we can also do is to affect output volume to make sure that having compressed the signal, it's operating at a good overall level before we start thinking about things like volume automation.
Loving ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, loving ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
Great. And what we're also now in a position to do, if we want to, of course, is to start thinking about just feeding this into some of the effects that we've got working within this track already. So we could look at adding a bit of compression here. And let's see what's an auxiliary 3. Some shimmer. And that's going to give us 2 separate reverbs on the track, and we should be there or thereabouts.
Loving ain't simple with you anymore. We have become opposites. No, loving ain't simple with you anytime. Battle lines drawn.
So that should provide an introduction to the way that classic channel strips work. They often feature both EQ and dynamic sections, and now you have some idea of how to configure them.